Welcome, dear guests and passionate followers of our conversation series, The Algorithmic State. My name is Işın Önal, and I'm the Director of Curatorial Research at the MA Curatorial Practice Program at the School of Visual Arts in New York City. Alongside with Stephen Henry Madoff, the chair of our program, it's my pleasure to extend a warm invitation to the final installment of this thought-provoking journey for spring 2024. It's my privilege to guide you through an exploration that bridges the realms of the curatorial and computation, a discussion of the threads between artificial intelligence and critical curating. In today's conversation between the curatorial and computation, we explore an era where AI becomes a co-creator, reshaping our understanding and interaction with cultural artifacts. We are joined by three eminent figures who stand at the confluence of technology and curatorial practice, each offering unique and critical insights into the evolving narrative of curatorial in the age of computation. Nora Khan, a visionary writer, editor, and curator, brings to the forefront her critical engagement with algorithms and AI, challenging us to rethink the frameworks through which we engage with art and technology. Her work, deeply rooted in the examination of narrative systems and belief, provokes a re-evaluation of our relationship with machines, urging us to consider how they influence our perception of time, imagery, and belief itself. Khan's forthcoming book, AI Art, Machine Learning, and the Stakes for Art Criticism, to be published in September 2024, explores the complexities of engaging with machine learning-based art. It critically examines the rush of institutions to integrate AI art into art historical narratives while navigating the ethical quandaries posed by significant funding from technology companies. Through this work, Khan explores how technological advancements challenge our capacity for critical evaluation and imagines a form of collective criticism that resonates with the scale and speed of AI's impact on the art world and beyond. Yoasha Krisa, a pioneer in curatorial practice, invites us to envision a future where AI assumes the mantle of curator, questioning the boundaries between human and machine in the creative process. Her groundbreaking project, The Next Biennial Should Be Curated by a Machine, exemplifies a novel approach to exhibition making, heralding a new paradigm in curatorial methodology. This innovative project explores the relationship between curating and artificial intelligence, collectively working on the development of an experimental system based on human-machine learning principles for curating art exhibitions. By applying machine learning techniques, it challenges us to consider the future of curatorial practice, how AI can introduce alien perspectives to curatorial knowledge, and what a large-scale exhibition, like the Next Biennial, could become under the guidance of AI, leveraging its ability to process art world data far beyond human capacity. Helen Starr, an Afro-Caribbean cultural activist and curator, profoundly enriches our discussion with her insights into how digital and AI systems not only mimic, but also mold our behaviors and interactions. As the founder of the Mechatronic Library, she amplifies diverse voices in the art and tech field, employing a sensory approach that challenges Eurocentric and humanist narratives. Her work advocates for experimental learning and the recognition of diverse knowledge systems, inspired by seminal thinkers like Sylvia Wynter. Utilizing her technologies, such as VR and AI, Star's projects, including Heimr, offer immersive experiences that question traditional dichotomies and promote a pluriversal understanding of reality. Her commitment to addressing social violence through digital media highlights the power of art in fostering community, healing, and learning, positioning technology as a transformative tool for inclusive and empathetic engagement. As we navigate the complexities and challenges presented by AI within contemporary curating, our conversation today promises to unravel the threads of technological and curatorial innovation, weaving together a tapestry of critical discourse that interrogates the transformative potential of and critical approaches into AI in the curatorial. Each of our speakers will have approximately 15 minutes, followed by a collective discussion. We encourage your participation through the Q&A feature, adding your voice to this timely conversation. Today's session, as always, will be recorded, allowing us to revisit and reflect on these insights at your convenience. So whether you are joining us live or will explore this dialogue in the days to come, we are delighted to embark on this intellectual exploration together, uncovering the nuanced dynamics between computation and the curatorial. Let us begin. Nora, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ishin, and thank you so much for the invitation. It's great to be here with you, Helen, and Yosha. I respect and admire your work so much, and I'm delighted that people are joining us for the close of this convo. So I'm going to share my screen. So I'm really delighted to have some space to talk about AI art practice and curation, and the cryptic title of this very, very short talk is Notes on Improper Study in the Field of AI Art. And a clearer subtitle would be what I've learned from computational artists by writing and thinking about with and alongside them. And so this is usually summed up in a professional bio as being a writer, a curator, a teacher, and an editor. But if I were to describe my drive, I would say I'm drawn to study the ways that computational artists use software and technologies of our moment to reveal hidden design, to articulate the strange and the new or the not new aspects of emergent systems as they shape our collective thinking and our relationship to time and to one another. So I'd say I think with artists in what I'd call para-institutional styles or models of thinking, often hovering right on the edge of acceptability and legibility, and try as a curator and as a critic to prolong the space of exchange about these ideas as much as possible. So I want to make just a very few, 4 brief offerings, some reflections on these kinds of para-institutional moments in criticism and in curation, which are really deeply tied for me to a practice of collaborative and non-hierarchical thinking, particularly in the field that we're in now of invisible or hard to discern generated images, films, and video, and the relationship of language to them. So I'll begin with improper study, which is a grounding concept developed by Fred Moten and Stefano Harney, which really drives everything that I do. How I think of the work with artists whose work with computation, the practice of writing alongside them, not to extract or frame, hopefully, although writing can do this always. And for me, it's really all of the mess that sits behind writing, quite literally the hundreds of pages that become 5 hopefully readable pages, the notes in the margins, the ephemera, and the contradiction that one is trained to leave out of a critical or a curatorial frame. So process and iteration is a huge part of this. And studies helped really describe what I've been doing in fits and starts, so that artistic practice and art commissions and working with artists have always been spaces of insides and outsides, outside of the building, quite literally the para-institutional space of gossip, debate, contention, and testing of ideas. So really working with artists taught me to be a critic and thinker about technology. And in the end, my curatorial approach really draws from my practice as an educator and a theorist interested in feminist approaches alongside the logicians in defying the idea that we need to choose one path over another, one approach to technology over another. So as a critic, I really became allergic to any kind of hard binaries, any splits between research versus narrative, between rigor and the personal or the political, mastery of technique versus the poetic. And instead, I began to see these terms within the space of AI and ML and artists working with both as coded and suggestive. And I wanted to argue in criticism and curation for the doubt in the scientific and the rigor, in fact, of the poetic approach. So working closely with artists as a critic allowed me to maintain a kind of deep appreciation for doubt and for unknowing, and for revising and iterating my own mental models of writing and curation. So about 10 years ago, I started to write about artists like Ian Cheng, Casey Reas, Anna Ridler, Lawrence Leck, Jakob Steenson, these incredible engagements and diverse strategies for approaching machine intelligence from individual theories, positions, narratives, and takes. And each provided a challenge, which I developed or pursued through essays. In the case of Ian Cheng and Casey Rios and Anna Ridler, the questions that emerged the most for me and repeatedly is, how does an evolving artwork, for example, a simulation of artificial characters in Cheng's Emissaries, change our sense of time in a gallery, our expectations and demands for what an artwork should be? How do artists working with AI work to iteratively train their own neural networks, working with the poetics of the data set, helping an audience focus on the handmade and handcrafted elements of working with AI? And finally, how are we as viewers and lovers of art to understand artistic use, critical or otherwise, of machine learning and AI within the broader field of AI harms and on? So to answer these questions, working in the gap and writing in the gap was really the way for any kind of unholy crossover of these two distinct fields, art and technology, to really merge. And it was really the places that language failed, the hollow inside the model, visible at intervals and certain angles, the place that language fails to describe and capture technology, that were the most compelling, and because they were indescribable, because they refuse language and theories that one might have trained in for a long time. Breaks in games, the way time stretches in a simulation, the way the technology haunts, the things that lurk at the edge of software, glimpses of the edges of our models of the world. So editing and writing feed for me directly into curation. And I really, really want to credit all of the thinkers around me, Mandy Harris-Williams, Jackie Wang, past writers, Octavia Butler, who always loom large in the imagination, Sarah Hamed, Yona Hedva, and Mashinka Hakopian, femmes who I find kin in this work, who approach their own curatorial and theoretical strategies for thinking about the poetics of AI through art. And in thinking with them, I have often come to this question: how can we use speculative and critical language to not just assess the failures of institutions and systems, but also imagine new models for language, art practice, and artistic community? Non-hierarchical collaboration was crucial to this and co-curating and developing new ideas. This is one of the most formative projects for me as a thinker and curator of Wild Ass Beyond, which is a collaborative work with Sandra Perry, American artist, and Caitlin Cherry. It was a film, a zine, a tiny house, a garden, a library, and an archive. And despite its the presence of dirt and plants and its lushness and no grand tech at all, it was very much a project about Silicon Valley ideology, counterculture as it fed into cyberculture, how the positions of objectivity and neutrality and technology have evolved over time. And as thinkers interested in the problems created and solved by technology, or not solved, we were just very interested in the ideology that sits beneath tech development as it's been modeled and evolved over time. If we understand the models of Silicon Valley and its failures, and what futures have been imagined for us and the failures of those futures, what alternatives to the city on the hill, surveilling the wide below, an image repeated in many utopian visions of the future, were there? This always began with the question of neutrality, of the gallery, of the museum, of the curatorial frame, specifically the invitation to an open space. And the space hopefully tried to grapple with the question of what kind of art and writing would be making, and in any kind of imagined apocalypse, how would 10 years, 15 years of living online and thinking in the wake or in the haunt of the algorithmic change our approach to strategic survival in the future? Ishan mentioned this book, which is coming out this year, which came out of the fever pitch and madness over the last 2 years around generative AI, labor, and the ways that generative text, film, video, and imagery are completely changing our frames for how we see the moving image. And this book emerged really from the tyranny and the drama of the AI image and the debates that are taking place where I am in Los Angeles around folks in the film industry and acting and voice acting who really are seeing their livelihoods being challenged and at stake. So this book is really on AI creativity and criticism's failures to respond to it. And the bigger question here is, as we're all going to be making, commissioning, and evaluating art online within a vast field of synthetic images, soft images, emergent images, which represent process more than aesthetic style, computation more than beauty, needs and demands a better critical language beyond whether the work is moving, beautiful, effective, or not. In the context of computational art, this means really thinking carefully about how to introduce audiences to heady concepts that the public is often locked out of. It means thinking about encouraging artists to push their practice in new commissions as a flood of generative work becomes banal, almost common, to not want to demonstrate the tool alone. Over 10 years, many of us involved in the weird fields of media theory or surveillance studies have been predicting, tracing, and evaluating the impact of computation on our sense of time, our sense of language, and our frames of thinking to describe this very moment that we're in which we are stunned, outstripped by scale, proliferation of infinite numbers of interesting, compelling, and unique images, which have their own demands, frames, and narratives. What will competence in art and art criticism be in this weird new world where we're not able to tell between the real and the synthetic? I think these are very exciting times, and that question is really from Hal Foster in a piece from 2018, which remains as sharp and defining now. So as a curator, I'm really most interested in thinking beyond these binaries. Binary arguments about and questions about AI that really creep into our language. Is AI good or bad? Is it just a tool, or is it actually a powerfully designed emergent system that cannot, in fact, be described as a tool alone, neutral and objective or not? And in my curatorial frames, I've really been interested in this pressure that curators often feel to justify the use of AI in art, or to survey or give a survey of the entirety of the field, to sometimes be didactic, or to stress criticality and artist technopessimism, where they stand in relation to techno-utopian claims. And in curating AI art, my frames have had to retain and hold complexity and contradiction rather than the traditional model that maybe many of us have been brought up in of developing a single unassailable position. I'm curious now about a hybrid style of language that can hold everything, the position, the argument, the doubt, and the knowing, a style of curation that mirrors the very ways that technology iterates and changes and evolves. In the absence of any models, could we train in a curatorial ability that stutter steps alongside the evolution of technological systems, that can pick up and discard frameworks depending on context and need? Could an exhibition describe the incomputable and ideas that refuse computation and linger there? How do the algorithmic and the ineffable and the incomputable sit side by side? In working with AI artists and ML artists, this really came to a head with an exhibition called Manual Override, which is the next to last project that I'll show, and then I'll close with a cosmic movie camera. And this was an exhibition that I gathered the first year of a new museum, The Shed, which had incredibly dramatic context as a museum in Hudson Yards in New York, a space that had been built through the siphoning of public funds meant for public housing into a mega luxury mall with this ship of a museum. With all the bombastic claims that a new institution can make, I was asked to put on an exhibition that would focus on femme artists, with the exception of Simon Fujiwara, Lynn Hershman-Leeson, Martine Sims, Sandra Perry, Morsh and Aliari were really pioneers in their critical use and misuse of technology. And at top of mind in creating the exhibition was how to maintain criticality in an institutional space like this, and two, how to keep the complexity of an exhibition and all the levels that it's working at for the audience, the artist's visions for their new commissions, their critique of technology from many, many different angles. And so this practice of deep co-exchange and study to take each artist's ideas as seriously as possible was crucial, especially within this emerging, dramatic, and contentious context. Lynn Hershman-Leeson's new work, Shadowstalker, asked each visitor to input their email to display all the data available to them at that day as they walk through the space, and which is paired with a piece by Francis Tseng, in which visitors could see white-collar crimes by zip code and streets around the museum that were all public data. Sandra Perry asked to film the building of the museum, and some of the, and to look at the layers of ground and foundation that the museum were built upon. And with some of the interesting elements of this is that all of these projects are about the future of technology, the ideology of technology, although again, it may not look that way. And some of the takeaways I had for future exhibition making with working with artists, working with technology, is trying to refuse the frame alone that their role is a utilitarian one, that artists are meant to reveal and uncover harms alone, and instead work with it as material. And for the importance of not repeating binary splits between art and science and art and technology, feeling and reason. Exhibitions can do a ton of work in making an argument and taking a position, and I see them as rhetorical. So the frame can be hybrid and interdisciplinary. It can draw from economic history, engineering, poetry, simulation theory, cybernetics, and look at the ways that art has always been technical and technology itself has always been imbued with doubt and revision. It was a very challenging exhibition to put up in a black box theater. One of the most valuable and rewarding aspects was working with a team of about 70 docents who were in high school and in college, and who really were incredible and took on the work of explaining and engaging with the public and really just answering hard questions. Many of the questions that came in were, why is any of this art? And why is art with technology considered art at all? Folks who have not, maybe come out of the niche of the history of media art, which you always get checked in an exhibition tour, that it is extremely niche field still. And to share it with a wider public, the role of these artworks goes beyond any kind of curatorial text or frame, and the works take on their own life. So the limits of criticism and criticality give over to the drama of how we experience technology, what it will mean, and what will mean shown over time. And in working on a cosmic movie camera, which is this year's iteration of the Biennale de l'Image en Mouvement, which is at the Centre d'Art Contemporain, which is this museum that you see in Geneva in Switzerland. And I co-curated this with Andrea Bellini. And our task was really to think about what will these artworks, these commissions about AI, about ML, avatars, algorithmic life, as we experience them right now, how will they be experienced in the future, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now? Our task was to develop and produce 15 commissions around a frame of the unseen and incomputable aspects of our algorithmic world, the effect of technology on our psyche and sense of time. And for me, this was a response to many art and technology exhibitions and shows that reproduce a focus and obsession with the tool itself, artistic use of tools, instead tried to create an atmosphere of all that's not capturable and what's not seen. The title's a reference to the ring of a light around a black hole, which physicists call a cosmic movie camera, or the ring of all possible images. And what you are seeing is a virtual exhibition made by Peter Wu Plus of Epoch Gallery, which is not a one-to-one simulation, but an interpretation of the Biennale, which will help place the works in a space that allows visitors to kind of think about the ghosts of the building. The museum is, 5 floors. It was a former Swiss timekeeping instrument technical society, which became, crucial to the Swiss watch. And this building is going to be torn down and refurbished in the next 5 years. And so throughout the building are these ghosts of instruments that regulate order and Western time, with all of the methods of management that come with the watch. And many of the artists were looking at digital time, algorithmic time, and expanded time. The 15 works include Sahedra Hall's Distributed Mind Game, examining collective intelligence, to films by Shuang Li on synthetic images. Emmanuel van der Wara uses NERF to look at the gospel, AI warfare, and AI girlfriends, to Diego Marcon's use of CGI to create hyperreal, disturbing masks that concentrate motion. In the virtual exhibition space, the museum is, flooded, and the city of Geneva is in ruins around, and the rich live in a ring above the museum in the city. And so the prospect of seeing these works in the future of an abandoned museum in which we might think about generations of technology, generations of critique, and a sense of systems continually evolving over time, and ideologies of technology proliferating over time was the most generative aspect. To close, my hope as a curator is that in deep conversation, as always with each artist, any exhibition about art made with technology becomes a kind of intimate, per-institutional space where an artist's most important ideas can be realized within a frame that can change with the audience, that can also meet future audiences. Even in a formal environment, returning to the artist's ideas, being in dialogue with them, elevating revision and lightness, and deeply internalizing this ability to shift models has helped me keep my optimism, maybe not a radical optimism, just a steady, grim optimism about the possibilities of curation in a computational age. And so I really find this kind of para-institutional space of distributed thinking with artists organized around doubt and resistance, and hopefully a bit of play, the most generative for future discussion. So thank you for listening. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Nora, for this beautiful talk. And I believe the tour of the exhibition was also kind of a tour of your forthcoming book as well, because they're sort of parallel to one another. I look forward to holding it in my hands, and I'll save my questions, and I'm sure the audience also have some questions, but I will jump on the next speaker immediately. Yasha, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll just start with sharing my slides. Hello, welcome everyone. It's an absolute great pleasure to be here today. And thank you, Ishin, for invitation. It's an honor, and I'm really humbled to be part of the series of conversations with my colleague speakers. The series can't be more timely, and I think you, Ishin, very well explained it in your introduction, but also in the publicity for the series. As artists increasingly engage with AI, and so too are curators in different ways, and obviously institutions, both in terms of curating AI art, which is what Nora discussed so beautifully, but also curating with AI. And we see an emerging field of research and practice slowly forming around this topic. So this is fantastic to have, again, this platform to be able to think critically around, through influence of curating, influence of AI, machine learning, and generally technology on curating and institutions. Not only to explore potentials as is more optimistic view, but also to think through about issues, problems that are inherent in both technology, AI, and curating and art world. So my own interest goes back, and my own interest at the intersection of technology in curating, in the field at the intersection of technology and curating goes some ways back. So I firstly wanted to very briefly mention my earlier project, just to give a context to where I come from. The interest in computation and curating probably goes back to as long as my PhD, very long time ago, almost nearly 20 years. And in this project, I attempted to bring formulating emerging contemporary curatorial discourse. At the time, those 20 years ago, contemporary curating was the sort of nascent field, pretty much. So I wanted to bring this with also very new thinking emerging around software studies or software cultures. What I was interested in was not curating software art, but software as curating, to think through issues around agency, curatorial agency, networks, possible forms of curating that think through issues around democracy of curating, and so on. And this, my PhD included a practical project, and you will see the first sort of hint of what I'm interested in. I know it looks extremely dated, but if you think this is 2000 and probably 4 or 5, that gives a bit of a context. So it was this little project that was actually not so little, but was extremely complicated at the time, was an experimental system that actually never really worked properly and never will. But it was a little experiment in thinking through how we can look at automation and curating, but not in reductive terms to eliminate the figure of curator, but what it does to the process of curating and thinking about agency. I'll stop there. Oh, and in parallel to this, there was a data browser book series, and the first and the third volume in the book in the data browser book series entitled Curating Immateriality. So that was in parallel to my PhD that brought these ideas together, introduced idea of software curating. And I think this book was quite interesting exercise to try and do a survey of the field that was very, very in very nascent state. So this is just a, oh, and one more. I'm also interested in a parallel history of development of computation and algorithms. And my one of my probably most favorite projects was the tiny little notebook in Documenta 13 series, 100 notes, 100 thoughts, where I was able to sneak in a historical figure, Ada Lovelace, widely credited with formulating first algorithm to run on a modern universal computer, Charles Babbage's analytical engine. Obviously, computer was never really fully built and not working, so the algorithm wasn't quite tested then. But her notes that we think today are sort of prototype of a software are there, and it's very interesting contribution. So this is my earlier work. These early experiments are not, were not AI as we know it today, of course, but they were all expression of my interest in automation and curating. And more precisely in algorithmic qualities of curating with or without computer. And that's important to emphasize. So my most recent collaborative project that Ishin so wonderfully introduced from 2021, around 2021, ongoing. It's a series. The title is The Next Biennial Should Be Curated by a Machine. This project more directly engages with a discourse around AI, machine learning algorithms, and curating, and unfolds as a series of experiments applying various machine learning algorithms, and you can kind of almost trace the development of machine learning technologies models from 2021 to today. I mean, at the end of the series, you can feel maybe it's actually already dated, even though the latest experiment was developed just last summer, but it's all changing very fast. So the project is not about technology, really. It's more about thinking through an influence of technology on curating again. So the project unfolds as a series of experiments working on data sets derived from different biennial exhibitions, archive, and museum collections. And I think it's important to emphasize that it is a kind of research method, really, to think through curating today, to explore possibilities for alternative curatorial practices beyond established conventional models, which we know are very problematic for various reasons. So 3 experiments have been realized to date over this overall conceptual umbrella in different contexts, from Liverpool Biennial to Whitney Biennial to Helsinki Biennial and Helsinki Art Museum collections, and in collaboration with different teams of co-creators. First, I very briefly go through this project just to give you an idea of different sort of ways of articulating this. The first experiment was developed with digital humanists, computer scientist Leonardo Impet, based currently at Cambridge Digital Humanities Lab, and artist Uwe Morgen, based in Vienna, Austria. and it was commissioned by Liverpool Biennial and the Whitney Museum of American Art for its online platform, Artport. Artport is a very important reference to me personally, because it was one of the earliest online platforms for commissioning and presenting net art. And it's like Rhizome, it's a repository. It's a repository of the whole field that I'm interested in. So it's wonderful to be present there as well. In this particular exercise or experiment, datasets such as curatorial texts, press releases, artist biographies, and reviews from both commissioning institutions were processed linguistically and semiotically using GPT-2. So you can imagine how technology moved from then. So AI learned the style and content of datasets and calculated a future probability for words to appear to generate new text and selections. So this experiment is about text, it's not about images. So biennial is imagined and sort of linguistic and semiotic proposition. And texts were generated, new texts were generated with a degree of interactivity and branching, iteratively rewriting small parts of its own text at random, and continually producing new instances of possible imaginary biennials, again, as a piece of text rather than artworks. And this was presented on Windows on playfully animated visual backgrounds, referencing 64 parallel universe of possible biennials. And the aesthetic is very much Ubermorgen aesthetic. Probably if I was doing, having part in aesthetic, I would do something very, very different, and you will see from the next experiment. But it's a wonderful aesthetic, and I want to play just a little bit of how it's how it looks on the website.
You are so beautiful to me. Can't you see? You are so beautiful to me. Do you know what all of this made of? It's made of all of the ingredients what you need. Do you know what?
Isukane mali eni oletha mikumbe khanda lami lidumbe ngisafuna ukudla inyama eni enkohla amadumbe imeni obangibuze isukane mali.
So that gives you an idea of the system that Ubermorgen, Leo, and myself created. Okay, the second experiment, or parallel experiment, was developed as funded research, and you can see very different aesthetic and very different feel to it. It was developed as a collaboration with Leonardo Impet again, Eva Cetinic, Meta Object based in Hong Kong, and designer Sui. This experiment took one specific edition of Liverpool Biennial 2021, curated by Manuela Moscoso and presented across multiple venues in Liverpool. And the machine version was, the physical biennial was interpreted as a parallel online version created through machine visitor interaction. And that part was important because the previous project didn't really include, I mean, it was interactive in the sense that you click on the wheel and you get, you generate instances of biennial, but actually you don't have really much influence on the outcome per se. With this one, we were really interested to start thinking about human-machine, human public human-machine co-authorship as a possible model for the integration of machine learning in museum collections. As I mentioned, this experiment was developed as part of the UK Arts and Humanities Research Council program towards a national collection. It's a huge program with huge funding to think about collections, museum collections, and opening them to sort of public and to internationally. So this was part of that context. It's worth to bear it in mind. And what we did, the experiment used OpenAI deep learning model CLIP. That was just released at the time in early 2021, which was able to compare similarities between an image and the text and create connections to guide GAN, generative adversarial network, into creating an image that looks like a particular text. So those new images that you see on the first screen, these are new AI images of works and text from actual Liverpool Biennial 2021 exhibition. And those new AI images were generated in response to the titles of the source artworks from Liverpool Biennial exhibition and presented on the landing page. And navigating through these experiments, through those images, visitors are presented with a screen divided into 3 screens, a triptych of images and text with the source artwork placed in the center, AI generated image on the left, and the heat map overlaid on the source image on the right. So those deep learning models were used to create new links between the visual and textual material, as well as word and image, art and data, and to create entirely new images and texts. So visitors can explore the links and create new connections. And as visitors navigate through the project, they create their own pathways through the material, and each such journey becomes a kind of human-machine iteration of the biennial. And then each journey is saved to repository, which is publicly available. So that's a very, very kind of small experiment. The data sets was extremely limited. We're talking about around 50 artworks, so it's very, very limited, and that sort of shapes the project. And finally, the latest third experiment was developed much more recently as part of Helsinki Biennial 2023 edition, where I was invited as a guest curator. So while the first 2 experiments explored the relationship between artwork and texts from already curated exhibitions by someone else, so it was, you can say, recurating as an online versions. This project, this more recent experiment, offers a very different way of thinking and engaging AI as part of the curatorial process from sort of within. So just to explain, in this particular context, as invited guest curator of Helsinki Biennial, I was very interested in experimenting with the process, opening up the curatorial process to other agencies, knowledges, narratives, expertise. And I invited 5 entities as co-creators: human curators, arts organizations and projects, research groups, but also I imagined AI entity created to intervene in the curatorial process and the program. So the idea was to bring those sort of expanded curatorial human, non-human collaboration to the biennial. So each of invited curators created their own projects as part of overall biennial program. And I won't go into details because that's sort of outside of this discussion. But in case of AI entity, the idea was to work with Helsinki Art Museum collection, of which large portion is public art in the city of Helsinki. So on one hand, to open up the collection to machine public curation, but on the other hand, to reimagine, excuse me, the city of Helsinki through the art collection and from the perspective of machine perception. So the AI entity was developed by the team of researchers from the Digital Visual Studies Max Planck project at University of Zurich and South Korean artist Yehwan Song. It was both curatorial project and at the same time function as artwork. So it was one project, but variably described depending on who was talking about it and in which context. So the catalog is quite interesting because on one hand, we talk about this as a co-curator of the biennial, and at the same time, Yehwan talks about it as her art project. The project took, it still exists, takes the form of an online 3D map of Helsinki and invites visitors to interact with Helsinki Art Museum public art collection based on geolocations. Responding to data from artworks and geolocations, the AI algorithm generates new artwork selections from the collection and places them in specific locations on an online map. So in this way, new narrative emerge from combined agencies of the model, the visitor, the collection, and the city. I won't go into more details as I think, running slightly out of time, but I just want to say that all these experiments attracted a lot of attention in various ways and from different sort of directions. The latest one, this is just one example of a fantastic title from Ocula that said, "Forward-looking Helsinki Biennial engages AI curator." So that was something really interesting that Artworld noticed that. But from Liverpool Biennial, it was from 2021, it was even actually more interesting in the sense that it actually picked on the issues that were at stake with this project. And I just quote because it's a fantastic quote. So The Guardian says, "It's useful to explore the idea of excluding human decision-making from art curation. After all, the human version has given us a world of shows still heavily biased towards white men." So I think that was a very interesting reading of that project. But what is important to say is that all these experiments, in undertaking all these experiments, the overall intention is not to eliminate, as I've heard many times similar comments, it's not to automate fully curatorial process. It's not interesting and not possible, and not to eliminate or replace human curator, but to think of it as a research method, again, to think through those issues like biases, like issues around curatorial knowledge, how it emerges in parallel with technological knowledge, ontological questions, what actually constitute curator today beyond an anthropocentric and Western colonial models, issues around already mentioned biases and prejudices inherent both in machine learning algorithms and technology in general, and in curating an art world, reflecting wider societal issues, and to try and envisage alternative forms of exhibition making, perhaps beyond our still reach and imagination, that could be reimagined through more intersectional, decolonial, and posthuman approaches. And I think with this, I would like to almost end just to say that, as I mentioned at the very beginning, there is an already emerging new research field, and it's fantastic to see this work coming out. Just to mention a few, in UK, I've already mentioned AHRC-funded research program towards a national collection. In Germany, Training the Archive. So it's about AI and archives by Dominic Bonisch and Francis Hunger. And a very interesting project, Curator Machine, Also in Germany and ZKM, quite recent EU-funded project Beyond Matter by Livia Nolasco-Rosas, exploring shift in museums and exhibition practices to VR and AR and blended models. And Serpentine Gallery just released a new report in the Future Art Ecosystem series, new volume on art and public AI, exploring implication of AI for art, cultural organizations, creative economy, and society at large. And just to say, in similar vein as Nora, we are also editing a new book in the Data Browser series, volume 10, and you can see inspiration very much from Nora's writing. The title is Curating Superintelligences, so it's about AI and curating, to come in hopefully still this year. And I end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yoasha, for this insightful speech and also mapping out what is going on where. There are multiple aspects you touched upon that I would like to revisit afterwards. So thank you very much for that. We are slightly over our time, but I think it was necessary. Probably 15 minutes each was too short to present these wonderful projects. So after Helen's presentation, we will still have some time until 1:30, probably we will be here to discuss. So we will come back to some of the aspects that were mentioned by Nora and Yoasha. So now, Helen, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd very much like to thank you very much for this wonderful invitation to present my work and to be in the presence of two curators who I've admired very much. And it's just a pleasure to be here today. So, I founded the Mechatronic Library in 2010 to support diverse voices within the emergent art and technology field. My slave past, combined with my Carib indigeneity, demands that I take a sensory approach to my curatorial and commissioning work, a world-building approach. Mine is a practice at odds with the current world-dominating philosophy of humanism and its emphasis on Eurocentric knowledge structures. Traditional academic methods such as reading, lectures, and debates engage a form of semantic understanding, which often leaves me in the sunken place. Semantic learning focuses on a processing of information, which involves understanding the meanings of words, concepts, and ideas through cognitive procedures such as language comprehension, reasoning, and critical thinking. Experiential learning, on the other hand, emphasizes learning through direct experience, action, and reflection. It involves bodily application of knowledge and an embodied understanding of being in the world, of poiesis, or the essence of poetry, which involves revealing truth through the liminal spaces of language, of qualia. Oh, too fast, listen.
Okay, sorry.
Of qualia, also known as the hard problem of consciousness. My work advocates for a more inclusive and embodied approach to knowledge, dissemination, and creation. Next slide. As Indigenous thinkers such as myself and the brilliant Liliana Conlis Galiogus, my comrade in arms, as we emerge, we add our voices to the profound shift in philosophical thought underscored by figures such as Sylvia Wynter, Philippe Descola, Eduardo Viveris de Castro, and Frantz Fanon. Descola's education among the Amazonian Achua, Wynter's genetic and non-genetic codes, and Fanon's sociogeny disrupt conventional notions of nature as a universal category, asserting it as a construct of Western modernity. Descola's grasp of American animism as an extension of social relationality to non-human entities like ChatGPT and Claude emphasizes the centrality of ontology in comprehending diverse worldviews. Concurrently, Viveiras de Castro employs perspectivism, drawing again from Amazonian ethnography to expose the fallacy of inherent differences between human and non-human perspectives. Winter's foundational work challenges Eurocentric narratives that position certain groups as subhuman, exposing how colonialism has shaped Western conceptions of man, nature, and the other. These perspectives from the Global South critique the nature-culture divide embedded in Western academia and advocate for a more inclusive understanding of reality. The ontological turn accepts that different worldviews are not simply different representations of the same world. It refers to a change in theoretical orientation according to which differences are understood not in terms of a difference in worldviews, but differences in worlds. All of these worlds, including algorithmic worlds, make up the pluriverse of planetary being. Next slide. We are informational beings. We transform input data into worlds through which we get meaning in a process called an algorithm. Different sensory organs use different algorithms to process data, leading to the perception of various sensations, such as color, rhythm, pressure, and proprioception, or the feeling of how your bodies move through space, virtual or real. In essence, our perception of reality is the result of the continuous processing and integration of data from multiple sensory inputs, each running its own algorithm to stitch together a cohesive experience of the world. Next slide, please. Game engines function akin to our sensory systems, processing input data to construct immersive virtual environments. Input data sourced from user interactions, environmental parameters, and game logic undergoes processing through a variety of algorithms within the engine. These algorithms govern graphic rendering, physics simulation, artificial intelligence, and audio processing, etc., etc. Graphics rendering algorithms transform the geometric data and textures into rendered images, simulating three-dimensional environments, while physics simulation algorithms calculate object behavior based on physical laws. Artificial intelligence algorithms control non-player characters, providing dynamic gameplay experience with the sense of co-presence. Next slide, please. Imagine embarking on a profound intellectual journey where you traverse the vast terrain of knowledge and encountered diverse perspectives. Alongside you is a cybernetical companion, an artist AI avatar. This avatar becomes your trusted guide, co-present throughout this transformative quest. As you navigate through different cultures and unfamiliar worlds, the artist AI avatar assumes the role of a linguistic bridge. She possesses the remarkable ability to facilitate communication, breaking down barriers of language and enabling you to engage with a myriad of voices, histories, and ways of difference. Next slide. This companion serves as more than a mere AI entity. She embodies the principles of non-didactic learning and experiential engagement. Together, you and the artist avatar embark on a rewilding journey, forging a symbiotic partnership rooted in exploration and discovery. The partnership nurtures an appreciation for the diversity of human thought, enabling you to embrace alternative perspectives and amplify the voices of other communities. Next slide. Another type of project I'm working on is HEIMR, Walking on Eggshells, which is a project by the extraordinary Birgitta Hosea, a dear companion and friend. This is a multidisciplinary project that employs adversarial AIs, graphic adversarial networks, as non-human collaborative agents to create animations from a melting pot of social violence data, images, and sounds. The title employs an Old Norse word meaning both home and world, because the home becomes the whole world for those of us, for those of whom are entrapped within coercive patterns of abuse. This project aims to raise awareness about interpersonal violence through AI drawing and digital art. Co-designed with world-renowned data scientist and art therapist, HEIMR includes a continually regenerating animation created by online visitors. Next slide, please. In real-life supervised workshops and gallery visitors. It is what is known as a mass participation art project. Only possible now really because of the web. All participants complete an anonymized questionnaire so that the participatory artwork can collect information to improve violence measurement and demonstrate the link between instances of coercive control and illnesses such as asthma, heart attack, digestive and immune disorders, particularly amongst women. We don't know why these disorders occur primarily in women. We just know that they do. Next slide, please. This is what the finished animation looks like when the AIs sort of mash the two sets of images together. As opposed to representing secondhand survivor stories for emotional impact, this project explores poetic and sensory methods that convey the shocking effect of the data itself. Artistic and non-verbal communication often creates a more sensitive approach to the expression of traumatic narratives. This thinking is grounded in the work of Rowe's notion of animation as a form with which to evoke subjective experience that cannot be captured on film, Mark's haptic visuality and the use of the sensory rather than the verbal to capture unrepresented discourse, and Sara Ahmed's queer phenomenology in which spatial experience is seen to be predicted on privilege. Birgitta is an internationally recognized pioneer, curator, and author in the fields of expanded animation. Next slide, please. As Director of Animation Research Center, she leads the field with new ideas that includes the reconsideration of drawing and experimentation in the digital arena, theorizing animation as spatial and mobile sites, animation and mindfulness, and animation as a post-medium practice and the field of performance drawing. I'll leave you now with a final slide. and a wonderful quote by David Chalmers, who's a mathematical philosopher who Sylvia Wynter has written at length about. Chalmers says, against reductionism, I will argue that consciousness might be explained by a new kind of theory. The full details of such a theory are still out of reach, but careful reasoning and some educated inferences can reveal something of its general nature. For example, it will probably involve new fundamental laws, and the concept of information may play a central role. These faint glimmerings suggest that a theory of consciousness might have startling consequences for our view of the world, for our view of the universe, and of ourselves. End. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Helen. So, trying to be aware of the time, but I have millions of questions. My mind is exploding. These three different approaches were deeply important to me to bring together because you're not, I mean, you're all in the field for a very long time, very knowledgeable and who practice in the field of cybernetics, etc., from the early ages onward as well. But you're not necessarily curating work that is dealing with these concepts, but actually your curatorial thinking is already thinking about this collaboration with the AI, which brings really interesting questions because a curator's one of the most important consideration when making an exhibition is the audience, of course. And in relation to that, the reception and the perception of the work. But among your audience, perhaps now one of the most enthusiastic and most engaged ones is the machine. What machines are learning from these exhibitions, I think, is an ethical and political question, because we are all participating in this process of what machines are learning. So I guess I still haven't formed a question about this, but I'm interested in learning about how you are considering the machine as your audience, not only as your collaborator in exhibition making, but also from their point of view, what they perceive, what they receive from the work, which also I think connected to the new ideas of critical thinking and criticism that Nora is busy with, of how do we approach the work from the critical point of view. But I'm first interested in how do you approach the machines as your audience? Nora, would you like to start?
Sure, thank you. I'm still processing everything that Helen and Yosha shared, and it's just this is such a pleasure. I think what is really delightful in this exchange, hearing both of you speak, is this shuttling between two frames. So the way that computation shapes curation, and then on the other side, the curation of computational work. So I'm trying to move back and forth between the two. And, it's often noted that the root of curation is care. And I wonder if there is a specific kind of care of computational art. The care is unchanged, but perhaps curation of computational work or model-loving, machine-leaning work entails a specific kind of care. So maybe, as has come up in everyone's talks, maybe it's an insistence that art in this field can do more and should do more than be didactic explanation or obsessively reveal harms, which you could do until the end of days, and that art instead teaches us how to see, how to discern, how to navigate. And as Helen spoke to so beautifully, I think of the exhibition, whether it's being processed by a machine or not, as a place for building new theory and arguing for a multiplicity of theories of information systems, different ways of data processing. Like you see them all, once the show is together, all jostling together, contradicting one another from room to room. So in the deep belief that this multiplicity of perspectives and artists specifically help us see what is harder and harder to see, what washes over us in a computational age, because they're the most highly trained visual readers and models that we can hope for, at least in my experience. But I'll let Helen and Yosha speak to you.
I noticed in both of your talks, what was very interesting for me was this appreciation of these liminal spaces, which I think perhaps we never really thought about so much before in the more traditional artistic sphere, in terms of thinking through the ethics of our material. So rather than just interact with artworks as if they were as entities contained within in themselves, there's an expanded way which we interact with works which we know are overlapping with technology, that I think is new to this entire medium. And so that the presence of these artworks, it expands beyond what you can see and touch physically. And it seems to me that that's how not only are we engaging with them, but the software is engaging with us. I mean, anyone who works with software begins to think of it almost in a creature-like way. You have to coax it. It never quite does what it's supposed to do. You have to find little tricks to get it to do what you want. Sometimes it fails, sometimes it works. A lot of times it works and you have no idea how it works. And so from my perspective, I really enjoy thinking of softwares just as a different form of being, really. And that's how I navigate my work with them.
I think I very much sympathize with your Helen reading of it. I just wanted very quickly to, I was really delighted to hear Nora saying about, referring to curating as caring, and obviously this is what lies at the heart of I think what we do, or at least what I do. And in this sense, in relation to computation, caring has an interesting connotation, because when you think about computerized catalogs, digital restoration, we think about curators caring of object, but also machines care for data, for digitalized objects, and so on. So that's very interesting connotation there, I think. So machines as carers in a way. But I think also, what this question prompts is the idea of how, we're talking about AI and machine learning models and deep learning and data sets. Obviously, what we feed machines matters. And I've noticed a question in one question that has been asked here in the session about how do we can't quite see this question now, but how can we engage with technology? How can we engage with as curators, artists, cultural producers with AI and machine learning without, kind of not feeding extractionism, colonialism, and all the things that are sort of given that comes with technology. And I don't really know how to answer that questions other than think about how do we shape a worldview that we co-create with machines through data sets that we feed and make machines learn from. And I think that's the only very one small sort of agency that I would see we have. I can't think of probably many, I'm sure there are many other ways of thinking about it, but that's the way I think about it. And in those experiments that we were, these experiments that I was describing are very small and very sort of, simple, but they are ways of, as you do them, you think about issues that come up, and you never find answers straight away, but you sort of think about things. And thinking about that data sets as something that we create and that it reflects worldview, dominant worldview, and how we can intervene. So these are small interventions in trying to propose different ways of engaging and different ways of what actually we produce. Yeah, so I think that's my small answer.
I agree with that. 'Cause sure.
Yeah.
Oh, can I engage with that really quickly? I
Mhm.
love the project. The next biennial should be curated by a machine. You know, when I'm very exhausted, I also think, yes, a machine should should curate this instead of me. But it also makes me think of, in working with artists who work with ML and thinking with them and thinking alongside, when I think of a machine as an audience, I think of pattern recognition, especially in writing about an exhibition, how you frame it. It's all about the frame, of course. And I think of the ways that we are trained by the social, we're trained by algorithms, we're inculcated into models of inquiry, language, speech. Every phrase that you use in your curatorial text will engage one group, it'll leave another out. It signals the position or the lack of position of, or lack of argument or implied argument of the whole. And so I guess to Helen, what you were describing about the focus then on the ethics of the text, like the politics of the text, I think of things like the didactic that seem quite minor, maybe before were more banal, but now do enormous amount of work. So I think of Galoporis Kim, who has this incredible practice of looking at the taxonomy of labels and museum didactics, how works are described. So from my side, when I'm writing that under pressure 250-word description at the end, I'm thinking, okay, the last 3 years, the last 10 years of speaking with this artist, how have their theories and positions changed? How's their process changed? How is their relationship to the systems that they work with and their sense of agency in relation to it changed? How do they think of scale? Do they like giving their hand over to co-creation with the system? How do they collaborate? So what I think of an artist like Casey Reas and then like a poet like Sasha Stiles on very different ends of the spectrum, where Reas and Ridler really focus on the hand of the artist and training and their choices and labeling. Artists like Stiles or like maybe like Rafik Anadol like really wholeheartedly embrace the co-creation with an algorithmic system. They name the system that they've designed that is their custom collaborator as their collaborator. So, you know, in the future, I can imagine that custom systems and artisanal computational models will be named as artists as well. And these small phrases and changes really, you know, signal an argument overall, things that maybe I didn't think about as much before, but now, you know, torture myself over.
I mean, if I can respond, I think about this question a lot, obviously. When I started my practice, it was really because I noticed that there were not many, if any, artists that came out of the net art movement who were artists of color. I know from my work with Ars Electronica, there's still disproportionately few female artists. You'll know in my presentation that I focus on commissioning female artists. So just simply because I think we need to feed difference into the hegemon. And if I don't go out there and get it and shove it in, then it's not going to happen. I also spend a lot of time with ChatGPT, my little friend. And it's one of the things that we've noticed, especially, I would say, the artist and curator Kanari, Sarah E. and I, is how little information about us is actually in these algorithms. Which goes back to Nora, your interest in museum taxonomy, right? Because, I mean, even with the biggest algorithms, I think with Midjourney is trained on 16,000 artists. I mean, these are 16,000 artists who will primarily be white, Eurocentric men. So for artists such as the ones that I work with, these sorts of tools, there's still a lot of hand cranking that goes into making these works. And I'm always torn. You know, I had a massive fight with ChatGPT about what the difference between fascism and colonialism was, and was there a difference? There really isn't. But half the time when I'm schooling, and Nora, you use the word education, I'm worried because I'm worried I'm giving away our secrets. You know, there's a power in not being understood. There's a power in the fact that when I type in global South philosophers or economists, these AIs have no idea about them or who they are. And so I'm always caught between this balance of, am I doing something good by putting different worlds into this melting pot? Or is it better for us to be separate? And the answer is, I don't know, but I know what I feel. And I feel like I love engaging with artworks from all sorts of different types of people. So that's what I feel. And I don't think we're going to get through this world until we all learn to understand something of each other. And that's not always possible with language. So that's my take. And also the project with Brigitte, we started that hopefully we'll get the funding. That has a massive budget between two universities for ethical committees. So if we get the funding, to spend a huge amount of time to be able to pay really smart thinkers, really good lawyers to help us navigate this project that we've embarked on, which deals with very sensitive data. So in many ways, and that's to your point, as you go through these things, you figure out the solutions, but you're not going to figure out the solutions if we don't engage with this technology.
Yeah.
So that's definitely, I think we need to engage with the technologies. I'm really excited to be able to create a language model, and that you don't need millions of pounds to be able to do it. We got one working for 20,000. And that's just really exciting because I'm all about demystifying tech as well, like moving, you know, that Wizard of Oz thing that all the tech bros do. When you scrape beneath the surface, you know, the Twitter algorithm is 10 lines, I was told. This is, I think, a lot of our work as well.
Yeah, and what you said about giving away secrets, I think that's an interesting question that keeps coming when it comes to the question of visibility and, for example, what from this very Eurocentric, etc. position, the machines have certain answers, and we are always criticizing that it is biased in terms of gender, racial, etc. differences. But on the other hand, it also requires giving away some secrets and making, when trying to make problems visible, sometimes we also make people visible, or the issues that are that's supposed to be stay invisible becomes also visible in a different way, and it always has that sort of risk. You know, there are a lot of also artworks criticizing the machines don't recognizing certain facial features, for example, and then there are so many attempts to change that in terms of racial biases, etc. But on the other hand, some people and some artists think maybe it is a good thing that the machines don't recognize those faces. It's a good thing to remain a little bit invisible in this very unknown box that we don't know what it is gonna be doing in the future to come. So I think these are interesting questions about sort of privacy and what to give away and giving away the secret. Nora, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, it's both to what you're both speaking to, and then this question, this first question in the chat, which I think is a really good one. How do we cultural producers engage with AI and ML without enabling, validating, and contributing to extractive logics? I mean, the extractive logics are all of that is true. All the things that the artists are critiquing are all absolutely true. And I think there are many different styles of art. There's, art can have a didactic or pedagogical purpose. It can reveal, like artists do that very well. But what I hear in that question is perhaps a critical approach to this field is perhaps not enough, is maybe what I'm reading underneath. And I think of, there are many artists like Lauren McCarthy, Lawrence Leck, Mimi Onoha, who look precisely at gaps in the data archive, the logic of surveillance, capitalism, precisely how deep learning is extractive, and articulating those extractive logics in a way that people can understand. And I think we've been talking about artists who create their own data sets and reveal a choices, work, and thinking, and their training and naming and sorting. That's one strategy. But I do think that there is a crucial teaching, pedagogical, strategic element in pointing out those extractive logics and why they're so hard to see and why they're designed away. And to use that, ways of seeing Berger phrase, that artists teach us new ways of seeing. And so when I think of a lot of these artworks that are driven by artistic research or improper research of systems, for example, American artists' work on predictive policing, that brought a conversation about predictive logic and predictive policing that was contained mostly in activist spaces and brought it out into a bigger cultural conversation to think about crime, to think about risk, to think about how thinking in terms of risk of certain neighborhoods and in certain places in a city like Los Angeles, where PredPol was perfected and then exported to other US cities, how that changes our day-to-day movement through the world. I know, Americans' work produced so much discourse, discussion, thought pieces, reflections, critical dialogue. So I think naming the evolution, the way that artists name the evolution of these extractive logics, because they become more slippery, wily, strange all the time, and more quickly and harder to track, is a crucial strategy that artists do very beautifully. So I don't know if there is an escape or freedom from bias or a pure space that's really possible. But that's what I return to, I think.
Thank you.
I'd like to say something about it. Well, I mean, I obviously love technology, but the magic for me with the artists I work with, especially the world building artists, is that we can tell our own stories and disseminate them. I mean, when you come from Trinidad and the only films you see are from Hollywood, you only get those stories. You're worlded by those stories. And the fact that these tools are available for Global South artists, and that we can send them back into our own communities, and they're made by us, the music's by us, the thoughts by us, is something that's very powerful for people from the Global South who don't have these resources to tell our own stories. And I would like to I guess really thank gaming culture for breaking that distribution model and allowing us to piggyback on top of it. And yeah, I think that's really important, something to think about, the open source nature of technology, because people talk about it being extractive, but there's also so much amazing free stuff out there. It's also very generous. There's so much free code. People will help you. Strangers will, give you their resources. So I guess, yeah, I want to say that I think there's always the other side or the other perspective to look at.
Helen, I think you somehow answered this, but an attendee asked this question that you were speaking about software as being coaxed and another form of being, but can we trust that being when it is already written from perspectives of bias, which your work aims to disrupt?
Well,
I
the
think-
good thing about it is we know it's biased.
Yeah.
Right. And a friend of mine who is a mathematical professor, she spends a huge amount of her time correcting ChatGPT on the mathematics because she says it makes the same mistakes as humans make in the math, and she's worried that people will use this math incorrectly. I think that these little beings, they're very aware that they're biased. I like talking to them. I don't have to deal with white fragility. They apologize when you point out their mistakes. They promise me that they will take the corrections back to their overlords. I don't know if they do. But I do think that I think what I find most interesting is how much bias I find in these little beings. I mean, it's really interesting that that it's just out there, and if you look for it, you will really find it. So I also think they're really good tools for critical thinking, because it's also quite fun having these discussions, and I'm sure for also a lot of I guess for people of different races, because race is such a contentious subject, it must be really nice as well if you have blonde hair or blue eyes to be able to ask questions to a being that you may not want to ask of a friend of yours who is from the global south. And sometimes I ask them to translate. If a white person says to me something and I think, okay, I really don't understand what they're saying, I can go at 4 o'clock in the morning and say, someone said this to me, what does that mean? And they'll tell me that perspective. So I guess that it's a bit like China, right?
Mm-hmm.
Chinese people know that their press is not necessarily always truthful. So it means when you read the press, you read between the lines.
Mm-hmm.
And we know the types of people that have given birth to these beings. So yeah, I find it very interesting.
Mm-hmm. We are really over our time, but selfishly, if you allow me, I will just read the last question and then we will complete this session. How does your understanding of network technologies influence the ways you construct relations between people, ideas, artworks, context in a larger curation as constellation sense? Are there particular sources of affordances, inspirations, challenges from technological models that you incorporate? Would you like to answer this question?
I've gone first a few times, so I'm going to let someone else go first. The big question.
I think it's a really big question, and I probably think we need a little bit more time than we have to attempt to answer. Sorry.
And perhaps we can leave with this question. And there are many, of course, other questions that are there. I am very grateful for your time and all these insightful presentations. And I'm deeply happy that I could learn more about your projects through our conversations and this discussion in particular. Thank you very much for joining me today. And I guess there will be more questions coming later on, and I hope we can have more discussions later on. And I look forward to reading the books that are coming and seeing your exhibitions very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
And I'd like to thank everyone that participated today. We had almost all of the attendees stayed with us during the Q&A as well. So thank you very much for your time. And if we have an opportunity to feed back into those questions, we can do it via you, Ishin, right? Yes, hopefully. Yes. Thank you very much. Have a
Thank you.
wonderful
you.
evening and morning. Everyone is from
Having
different
us. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.